as I mentioned, we're very happy to have Sally Kilpatrick with us. And now Sally is a USA Today bestselling author. Her latest novel, Oh My Stars, was described by RT Book Reviews as written in a way that makes readers feel as if they are hanging out with their best friend. And voice is such an important part of stories, so that's actually a great compliment. She has 5 novels. She's been a Golden Heart finalist. She's won multiple awards, including back-to-back 2018, 2019 Georgia Author of the Year awards. She's won the Maggie Award of Excellence, the Bookseller's Best, and the 2016 Nancy Knight Award for Mentorship. Now, if you want more information on Sally, you can visit her at her website. It's sallykilpatrick.com, or you can follow her on Twitter or Instagram under the handle Super Writer Mom. Hi, Sally. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am swell. I'm feeling the stains of 2020 burning off, and though we're still doing these things virtually, 2021's rolling right along and doing well. And Sally will be one of the speakers actually joining us this year at the conference, and very excited to have her there for that.
Yeah,
And
glad to be there.
yes, definitely. And I am going to step out of the way so that you guys are aware. Jessica Nettles, who is our chat manager extraordinaire, is going to be managing the chat tonight, and she's going to be dropping links and information and bugging you persistently about the questions. If you have any questions, just drop them in the Q&A function that is down at the bottom center of your screen. Pulls up another panel, and you just type the question in, and we'll be able to address those either as Sally goes or at the end, either way. And try not to put them in the chat because we may miss them as the chat moves on and on. But I guess with that, I'll step out of your way, and the show is yours, Sally. Glad to have you here.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, everyone. Are we ready to start some conflict? This is very odd. Let me see if I can see faces. Nope, I can't see faces. I'm going to have to pretend you're out there. All right. So this is the Nice Girl's Guide to Conflict. It was born of one of my critique partners who said the best workshops you can give are for something that you yourself had to work your way through. In this case, this is the point where I normally make my confession. I wrote 6 full manuscripts before the Happy Hour Choir, which ended up being my debut novel. And this workshop is for you if you are hearing comments like, your story is too quiet, and I have my notes right here, or you have too much external conflict and not enough internal conflict. And if that sounded like a bunch of word salad to you, don't worry, we're going to get to that. Or have you ever had someone say, nothing really happens in this story, or your story doesn't have a sense of urgency, or what is your character's true motivation? And one that I had scribbled on several manuscripts that I had originally intended to be romances was, have you ever read GMC by Deb Dixon? Again, put a pin in it. We're going to be back to that one. Conflict is at its essence an inherent incompatibility between the objectives of 2 or more characters or foes. As writers, though, I think what we often forget is that we need to have a simultaneous external conflict and an internal conflict. And well, I was just reading a book today that was all external conflict. And I can give an example. One of mine, I had a book that had the working title, Married to the Mortician. It may shock you to know that Harlequin was not that interested in a book called Married to the Mortician. This worked out fine for me because that book later went on to be Better Get to Living. And what I discovered was what it really needed was it needed a ghost, and it needed to be expanded into something that's more small town Southern fiction. But at the time I was trying to market it as a romance, and the kind folks at Harlequin gave me some very good feedback, which is you have too much external conflict, not enough internal. If your characters are only being buffeted about by, in my case, tornadoes and trailer fires and things like that, then they're not really taking initiative. You're going to want them to make some decisions. And that's where GMC comes in handy. If you're not familiar with it, there's a book by Deb Dixon called Goals, Motivation, and Conflict. In it, she breaks apart some movies like The Wizard of Oz, Casablanca, and an underappreciated classic, Lady Hawk. But the idea is, do you know your characters well enough to know what they want, why they want it, and why they can't have it? And I expanded upon that for the internal section for what does your character need? What kind of wound from the character's backstory is keeping them from meeting that need? And what beliefs do the character have? Does this character have that keeps them from meeting the need? In other words, it's kind of like the lies we tell each other. And this is the point where I'm going to go ahead and tell you that I have a handout for you. In fact, let me see, I can show you what it looks like here. And you can email me for it. It's just one that I do. And it has all of those questions that I was just asked, which I was just telling you about, and a couple of more. And it's just a thumbnail. I can't talk today. Pandemic's doing bad things here. It's a quick way to take a look at your characters and see what do they want, why do they want it, why can't they have it, what is that wound that they're trying to overcome. All right, so one of my favorite stories, one that I'm going to talk about right now, because what I'm going to do is go over some GMC and some novels you may or may not have read. But one of mine is Gods in Alabama by Jocelyn Jackson. And Arlene, her internal need is to be reunited with her family. It's a sense of forgiveness. And her wound, I can't tell you about because that would be a spoiler. But I will say another thing about that book is that it has two genius things to kind of organize it, which is a list, and it's also got a bargain with God. And what is it that keeps Arlene from getting what she needs? Is that she doesn't deserve grace and that she's made this deal with God. And I just realized I don't have my external conflict there on my notes, which I double checked. Another one, this is a romance novel called His Perfect Partner by Pris Oliveras. The heroine's external goal is that she wants to make it big on Broadway. And her motivation for doing so is that her father gave up his dreams of music, and she feels like she needs to kind of live out her father's dreams for him. The conflict is that her father is sick, so she also doesn't want to go back to Broadway and leave him alone. Internally, she needs to have a family of her own. And her wound is that she's been rejected both by a guy and by Broadway. And so she believes wrongly that she can't dance and have a family. In other words, she can't have it all. In my own book, The Happy Hour Choir, I have a character named Beulah Land, and put a pin in that. We're going to come back to it. And Beulah's external goal is basically simply to take care of Ginger. That's like her immediate goal. And that is because Ginger has cancer. Ginger's an older lady who's taken her in. Why is that her goal? Ginger took her in when her mother kicked her out. So it's a sense of loyalty. And what is the conflict? Well, Ginger has decided that Beulah needs to take her place playing piano at the church, but Beulah is mad at God. And then my hero, Luke, his goal is to prove his worth as a minister. He's had some rocky times, and his motivation there is that his father is a minister and he wants to follow in his father's footsteps. His conflict is, well, he's attracted to this harlot who plays piano in a bar across the street from the church. That was the story that got the attention of an agent and was later published. And I really think it's because at its essence, the conflict is you've got a character who is mad at God. And what's the worst possible thing you can do to that character? have her fall in love with a minister. Um, Now, there's some other ways as you're crafting your story, or in this case, what I like to do is once I've crafted the story, then I'll go back and look at it and see how can I add more conflict and tension either by the scene or for the book itself. Sarah McLean says that you need to use your character's fears against them, that you scare them into action. So that's a good thing to ask yourself is what is this character afraid of? And how can I use that to make them do things that they wouldn't necessarily want to do? Another great one is Virginia Cantra says, if a character thinks it, then he or she can say it. And that's one that I catch myself doing quite frequently. I might have a character think something, but there's that part of me that is polite Southern girl who would never have the character say it. And as I'm revising, I go back and I think, if I can have this character say that thing, then that is going to cause more conflict. Or when you're in the revision process, I'm thinking of Better Get to Live. And I had a scene where the hero and the heroine had spent the night together, and the mother went to his apartment outside and knocked on the door, and the heroine was kind of embarrassed, but all of the tension there was diffused because that was the end of it. All of the conflict took place outside. When I went back through and revised that particular scene, what I did was I had the daughter follow the mother through the funeral home, and their argument with the mother is playing out as they're walking past people. So that way you've added more tension, you've added the potential for embarrassment. It gave me the point to have another character kind of have an aha moment, to get mad about things, to discover things, but yet she's not in the middle of the argument. So she's kind of standing over to the side, and I can save that for later. And the other one is conflict lives in the butt. This is one of my favorites. This is another Sarah McLean quote. And it's when you're saying she would do such and such, but, well, that's your conflict. In Presley's case from Better Get to Living, she would be an actress, but she doesn't want to be on the casting couch. Or in Declan's case, in that particular book, he would leave the funeral home industry, but he made a promise, and he is the head of the family, and he's the only one keeping it running. So he's stuck in that place. And that's a good starting place. Then you can take it from there with your characters. Now let's say you're like, but Sally, I don't like for my characters to be in trouble. I don't like to push them around. I don't like to put them in bad positions. That would make you very much like me. I mean, I would love to just have all my characters sit down and have a tea party and maybe some witty banter over the scones. Unfortunately, that does not make for a very good book. And one of the ones that I discovered as I was trying to make myself write stories that had more escalating tension was a book called Break Into Conflict. Now this, for those of you who are very much right by the seat of your pants, as opposed to sit down and plot it out, you could open this book and just kind of have a shivery moment there, because it's very much templates. It's a bunch of questions, and you ask yourself, what is my character like? On one of the handouts that you can get from me that we'll talk about, it asks you, what are 3 external things that are going to change about this character over the course of the book? What are the 3 beliefs? We talked about this earlier about the wound that a character might have and the beliefs that keep them from healing that wound. It asks you that question. What are the 3 beliefs that this character believes that keep them from changing their worldview? The author of that particular book is Mary Buckham and Diana Love, and Diana has 2 N's, by the way. And it also asks you what the character wants at the beginning of the story, and then it helps you out to figure out, well, okay, well, now that the character has achieved this, what does the character want next? And now that the character has gotten this, what decision is he or she going to make? So if you're like me and you really have a hard time making your characters face problems, that's one book that'll help you do that. Um, Another thing I want to say is a lot of what I've said probably pertains far more to genre than to literary. If you think about it, a lot of literary books are more character studies, they're more internally driven. If you're writing very literary, then, not a lot may happen in the book. I can remember that my husband and I had an argument when we were first married about Kate Chopin's The Awakening. And he said, "Nothing happens in that book." And I said, "Everything happens in that book," because it's very much internal. It's very much what's going on in Edna's head. All right. Now, I've already talked to you a little bit about revision, and I hope what you're doing, I'm going to pause and say, with this workshop, what I like to do is I like to have people tell me, okay, well, this is my character's goal, motivation, conflict, and this is my other character's goal, motivation, conflict. And then we'll talk about it. We'll work it out, because a lot of times things we think of as external goals are actually internal, or vice versa. Or like I said, I was talking about genre a lot. If you have any kind of romantic subplot, or if you were writing romance, the romance itself is not your conflict. You should have two people who are very much going to, they are going about their own lives, and falling in love complicates things. That's going to make it a more interesting story. And then that too gives you more opportunities for things to go back and forth. One great book for that is The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. It's called The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. So if you're interested in romance, and you're interested in how external goals of the two characters versus their internal kind of wounds are playing off each other, I would recommend that one. All right. Now, let's talk about revision and redrafting. That's where I was going. I will never forget, I was in Tony Groom's class, and he said, "What draft are you on?" And I was like, "Draft? What do you mean draft?" And what he was saying is, there are two ways you can approach a manuscript once you have written it. And one of those is, you open up your Word file or your Scrivener or what have you, and you keep tinkering around in there and changing things up. That's basically revision. Or you can start from scratch, and that's a new draft. Now, some of you just gasped, absolutely gasped at the idea of opening up a new file and starting from scratch. But it works. I'm here to tell you that that is also part of my process, that starting with that 7th book, I printed out the manuscript, put it to the side as a sort of security blanket, opened up a Word document. Back then, I have Scrivener now. Thank goodness, love Scrivener. That's another story for another day. But opened up that new document and started from scratch. And two things are going to happen when you do that. One of them is you're going to kind of streamline the plot. And in my case, the body count is always higher in the first draft than the second. I just got done, or the carnage, I should say. I just got done with the second draft of my book that's coming out in September. It's called Much Ado About Barbecue. I mean, I burned down half the town. You don't need that. That is when I look at it, I'm like, well, that is your attempt at having external conflict drive the story, and it needed to have more internal. Or better get to live in the body count in that one. I swear the first draft, the murderer killed 7 people. I was like, you need to stop. This is not a thriller. This is not a mystery. This is Southern fiction with a little bit of a mystery to it. Let's just back that train up. We'll start from the beginning. That'll help us make sure that we kind of lean into the internal stuff as we're redrafting, and kind of streamline the plot as well. Funny story about redrafting versus revision. It's one that I like to tell, which is it could be the reason why Hemingway writes so spare. back in 1922, he and his first wife, Hadley, were in Paris, and he got a call from an editor who wanted to see his stuff, and he told Hadley to bring it. And Hadley just puts everything in the suitcase, carbons and all, like everything. And she's on the train. She goes to get a water. When she comes back, suitcase is gone. Everything he had written, except for some things that he had out on submission, and I think one other thing, gone. So he had to write from scratch. And I like to think that sometimes let's see, he said, the first and most important thing of all for writers today is to strip language clean, to lay it bare to the bone. And I wonder if he would have even ever come to that realization if Hadley hadn't accidentally lost his manuscripts. All right, a couple of other things. You're getting ready, correct? This is me. I'm putting on my high school teacher voice, which is you're getting ready to ask me questions about GMC, right? You're going to ask me, you're going to tell me about your characters and what they want and why they want it and why they can't have it. But a couple of other things as you're going through your stories. One is to think to yourself when you hit that second draft, or as you're going from your first draft to your second draft, or if you're revising because you still don't believe me, you're still not fully won over on this redrafting thing. How can I make things worse? Take a look at it. What can I do to make it worse? That could be, I would think, I'm trying to think what I did here. Oh, I know what I did. Take Better Get to Live In, the one that I told you was all about tornadoes and house fires and whatnot. I added, it occurred to me that a couple of characters were related, but they didn't know they were related. So that added some hostility and some embarrassment when that came to light. In a romance, if you're writing a romance or anything with a romantic subplot, think to yourself for half a second, how is this person the absolute worst person for this other person? And the flip side to that is you have to think to yourself, why would these people even get together? How do they bring the good out of each other? But what's keeping them apart? Take, for example, the worst best man that I was mentioning earlier. They're both up for the same job, but she also blames him for the reason why her husband jilted her on her wedding day. So how are the two of them supposed to work together? You'll have to read the book to find out. Here's another one to really think about. We need to think about what your characters, what they really, really want. What's the worst possible way you could give it to them? For example, in my book, Bless Her Heart, I have a woman who desperately wants to have children. Desperately. This is something she really, really wants. Well, what is one of the worst ways that I could do that? Have her have a child with someone other than her husband. Now, there's more to the story than that, but especially since she's a preacher's wife, it went over like a lead balloon, as you can imagine. And we've already mentioned our character's fear. Okay. Now, I think we're ready for I see some questions and answers. Let's see here. What sorts of that's from Jessica. Let's see here. Yes. Jessica Wilson says, you write dialogue so well in your novels. Can you please share some tips for writing some realistic dialogue? Excellent. Thank you, by the way. I think listening is the key. For example, in my books, a lot of the dialogue that I type are things that I have heard from people back home. I think back to things my father has said. I think that and my grandmother too. Another trick is I love to watch older movies because that banter goes back and forth. I think of The Thin Man, for example, and there's a line where Nora tells Nick to be careful. She doesn't want to be a widow. And he says, you won't be a widow for long. And she says, you're darn right I won't. That sort of dialogue really appeals to me. I'm really looking for that banter. I'm also looking for the unexpected. And sometimes my characters surprise me. Again, in Bless Her Heart, I have an older character who has dementia. And Posey asks her grandmother what she wants for Christmas. And the lady says, Tom Brokaw. And surprised the heck out of me. But not only did it make for snappy dialogue, and some words are inherently funnier than others, like shenanigans or brokaw. Brokaw's fun to say, but also it was unexpected. And I think that's a big thing to do. I've got another question, which is how often do you refer to your old draft when redrafting? And I would say that that very much depends on the book. I find that I don't refer to it as often as I would think that I do. And the more times I go through the process of writing a novel, the less that I refer to that original draft. But like I said, it's really much more of a security blanket so that you're not flying just completely by the seat of your pants. And I've found that the redrafting process is actually quicker. That second draft goes quicker than your first draft. So don't be afraid about that if it's taking you a while to write your first draft. Let's see, I've got another question, which is to play off the dialogue question. Can you discuss a bit how conflict can arise in dialogue? Like you said, my character wouldn't say that, and how to use dialogue to make things worse. Oh, hi, Leslie. Let's see here. Oh, I knew I should have pulled an example of that. Let me think. I just did this in the barbecue book, and I had her think something, and then I just went ahead and have her say it. And I am thinking they were talking about, I think they were talking about the difference in barbecue, which we're gonna get very barbecue oriented here for just a second. In this particular book, she is a proponent of whole hog barbecue on a pit. We're talking 12, 16 hours minimum outside, live coals. And he has converted to the smoker. So I think she was going to say something about his cart. She thought about his cardboard barbecue, and I just went ahead and had her say it. She was like, well, mine will be better than your cardboard barbecue, which doesn't sound that great right now, but you'll just have to trust me that it works better in the book. Okay. Do I have any other questions?
I'll ask you one while we're waiting.
Okay.
But I'm curious, talking about conflict, and I'm gonna put you on the spot with this one, so I apologize for that. But whether it's in books that you have written or books that you have read, what is an example you can think of where conflict has gone wrong, where it didn't work for the story, it didn't work for you, or it didn't work in the book that you were reading? I guess if it was your own writing and you had to go back and rework it, where did it go wrong?
Because I have one that's fresh in my mind, but I want to kind of camouflage it a little bit because it's not mine. I'm going to say, okay, let's say you have a character who needs to get a flight to Chicago to see his sick grandmother, and he borrows money, and then the grandmother just shows up. And I'm like, whoa, 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 because there was a lot going on there at first. He borrows the money from the heroine, which is its own kind of conflict. And I was kind of dicey about that because she has trust issues. And I'm like, I don't think she's going to loan him money when she's only known him for 2 weeks, guys. But then, two, you've got this whole conflict going about him getting to Chicago. And yet here shows up the grandmother. You've negated that whole part of the story. What was the point of even having him fly there, of having him ask for the money? And two, it very much feels like, and this is what you want to avoid, that you're taking your characters and moving them where you want them to go, like figures on a chessboard. You can't just say, I want my character to be friends with this person, so I'm going to have them illogically go to a club, even though in chapter 1 they said they don't like clubbing. Another thing that happened in a book that I was reading recently is, and this was a romance, everything that was keeping the hero and heroine apart was external. It's like from the minute they saw each other, they were attracted to each other, they were in love, but her ex-boyfriend, his job, it was all things that happened to them. And so there was no growth for either character. Does that make sense?
I understand. Leslie has another question for you.
Yeah.
Says, I've always heard that you can't have internal conflict that can be resolved with a conversation. How can you tell when the conflict is enough?
Well, that depends a lot on what you're writing, and what audience you're writing for. Because in the case of a romance, I'm not sure that you can have enough conflict for some people. They love their angst. And I think it has to be like a series of conversations. It can't just be one conversation, but it's got to be throughout the book. There's got to be some give, some take. I'm thinking of, oh gosh, okay, Meg and Joe by Virginia Cantor. It's a retelling of Little Women. And the black moment is when the chef figures out that Joe has been blogging about him kind of behind his back. And they can't fix that with a conversation. It takes distance and it takes several conversations. Um, that's one example. I think basically what a lot of people say when they tell you that sort of thing is to avoid the misunderstandings. And yet people still write books with misunderstandings. I've written a book with a misunderstanding in it. Um, it can't be as simple as, well, I'll go ahead and tell you. Bittersweet Creek is mine, where the hero and the heroine had gotten married. They'd gotten married. They were supposed to meet for the honeymoon. He doesn't show up. She goes to see the mother. The mother lies to her, and she takes that at face value. That's a difficult one. It's not my strongest conflict because, again, all she had to do was call him up or find him in some way, shape, or form and have a conversation, and that could have been resolved. Of course, there's a reason why he didn't answer her, but I'm going to leave that one blank in case anybody wants to read the book.
Yeah. I know with the question about that question about whether or not conflict is too much or when do you know it's enough. Every time I think about conflict in the context of writing, I think of the success of reality television and all of the programs that basically function and thrive entirely on conflict. And obviously, there's an audience for that. So I would say to your point that there may not be a point where there's too much conflict unless it overwhelms the story. But people obviously seem to enjoy it.
They do. They do.
Hmm.
I'm. This is an odd time where I think in the past couple of months or so, we've seen some more books, stories, TV shows that don't have as much conflict because we've got enough of it in the outside world. But for the most part, the more conflict, the better. It's just a question of making sure that it's organic. I'm thinking, oh, that's what I was going to say earlier when you were asking what's an example of bad conflict. If your characters are having the same argument on page 250 that they had back on page 12, something's wrong. You're basically just having them yell at each other to yell at them. And that's not real conflict. It needs to be from something deep within. That was the other example I was thinking of.
Okay. All right, cool. Robert has a question. It's a little off topic, but still it's writing related, so let's address it. Do you believe that the protagonist must enter each scene with a specific goal? If so, what is your process for plotting?
Hmm? Well, that's still there because we're still talking about goals, and
Mhm.
should each scene have a conflict? I can't really break it down like that because if I do, I think I would go a little nutty. I can't really break every scene down and think, okay, what is the goal for this one? What's the conflict in this one? I kind of have to let it be a little more organic, let it flow a little more like that. I will say, however, if that appeals to you, if that way of approaching story appeals to you, there is a book called Story Genius by Lisa Crone that you very much attack each scene with this idea of what's the goal of the character in this scene. And you absolutely can break it down if that's what you want to do. So that you've got overarching goals, you've got immediate goals, and then you've got the goal of the scene. And that will make for a very tight paced story that'll keep people going.
Yeah. Yeah. I always like to think of each scene as having a purpose. I mean, I guess that's kind of the same as saying goal,
Yeah, they
but
have
but
to
yeah,
have a
yeah.
purpose.
So I mean, it has to have a reason to be there. So yeah, so no, that's cool. Um, Keep questions coming, guys. These are good questions. So think about conflict and I'll actually put this in the context of a writer's journey. So for you personally,
Mhm.
obviously you have your own journey separate from everybody else, but where in your journey did the conflict, and I'm gonna refer to that as like, should I continue, should I not continue, will I ever get there, kind of thing. Was there ever a point that it got a little too overwhelming for you, where you kind of wondered if you'd ever get there, or if you
Or
thought I actually should just stop entirely?
I think last week I thought I should stop. But I'm so ridiculously stubborn. I just keep going. Um, it's funny you should mention that because, and I should have thought about this earlier. I like to call the Happy Hour Choir my F it book. Um, and when I'm not on videos, I might not use F. I might use the other word. But the idea is that I had written these 6 books, and I wrote all through high school. So I started writing stories, like long stories, um, when I was a freshman in high school, and I have several longhand notebook paper. But my first serious story was 1998-ish. Um, and I chased trends. I thought at one point I'll write a romance novel because it's easier. It is not easier. It's like writing a sonnet. You have such strict kind of guidelines, these points that you have to hit. It's very much about how you start it and how you end it. A lot more freedom in Southern fiction to kind of include side plots and things like that. But I got to a point right before the happy hour choir where I was just so frustrated. I knew that I could write. I knew I could turn a phrase nicely. I knew that I'm like, what's wrong? And what it boils down to is it boils down to story. And there really wasn't enough going on in my books. But I got mad. I said,
Mhm.
that's it. I had the Break Into Fiction book, and I plotted the happy hour choir using that, and that was very helpful to me. But it started with a what if question. What if you were a young, vibrant woman with the name Beulah Land, which sounds like somebody's grandmother? And even worse, what if, even though you're named for heaven, you're really a bit of a hellion? And that's where that started. And I wrote that book I was mad. I was just mad. I went from I should probably give up to I'm just going to write what I want to write, and that's just going to be that in a matter of months. And I actually wrote that one while I was in the tail end of getting my MAPW.
Cool. Leslie has a question again. Can you have internal conflict without an external goal?
You can. That's probably more of a literary book if you've got a lot of internal conflict without an external goal. I think you're better off though if you've got external goals and internal conflict and they're playing off each other, so that the things that you want externally lead you to places that make you really question your wound, what hurts inside you. For example, in the happy hour choir, because she wants to take care of Ginger, but Ginger wants her to play piano at the church, and Ginger's not above saying it's her dying wish. But now she has to go to the church, but she's mad at God, but she has to go to the church because Ginger wants her to. So then that creates all of this internal conflict of, um, I want to do this for Ginger, but I don't want to be in church. And then that causes external conflict when the entire choir quits because that harlot from the bar is playing piano. So then it just keeps going back and forth, so that something internal will spark something external, and that's how you keep the story going.
Yeah. So in this whole exploration of conflict, do you when you're writing and you're thinking about the conflict that you want for your characters, do you try to have like a primary conflict, like a sort of thing that that your character is having to deal with, we'll just say more aggressively through the story, that is tied to their change? if
I
I
need
if I
to
say
have,
that right.
well, I think we all pretty much have to have some kind of ticking clock. And I've found that you've got to have some kind of structure there. The barbecue book that I just finished, it revolves around a cooking competition, and then the winner of the competition gets to cater the barbecue festival, and that gives you a framework while you're going through all of the other external, internal, push me, pull me. Externally, it's very simple. It's both characters want to win, but only one of them's going to.
Hmm.
But then that causes them to reevaluate internally who they are. In this case, it's basically a play on an enemies to lovers. It's loosely based on Much Ado About Nothing. So it's my Beatrice and my Benedict character going from absolutely hating each other to falling in love,
Yeah, cool.
but with barbecue.
I'm curious. I'm curious before I go to another question, or before we get any more. Now, did you know about all this about barbecue, or did you have to do that terrible research on the life of a barbecue pro?
I well, I grew up in a town that had a barbecue festival, so that part was true. And then it was born, as many good ideas are, by something that, well, my husband was ribbing me to death about it. He's like, we went there finally. He said, but there's no competition. I said, it's a one traffic light town. How much competition can we have? And from there, I decided I would finally give him his competition, because I started doing the research and found out that my little one traffic light town, I think we're up to 3 or 4 now where I grew up, but this little town, the county doesn't have more than 15,000 people in it, I don't think. 4 barbecue restaurants.
Wow.
And I grew up with it, and I can remember very vividly going with my father to this place in Mifflin, and there they've got the pit in the ground. It's the whole hog. They flipped it, and my dad is pointing out what he wants, what part of the meat he wants.
Hmm.
So that part was experience, and then I had to do some reading. We've done some traveling. I would have really liked to have done my usual research, which would have involved finding somebody to let me sit up with them all night at a whole hog pit, and then shadowing somebody in a restaurant. But I had to settle for books and articles this go round, and it's just really
Hmm.
not the same.
Yeah. I bet though that makes for some in that small town makes for some good conflict. You got 4 barbecue restaurants and probably hundreds of different opinions as to which one is
Oh,
the best
oh
one.
yeah.
I'm sure
Barbecue,
people get very angry about
nobody can
that.
agree on that.
Robert has a question. What is your rule of thumb for ensuring that the stakes are high enough in your novels to drive conflict?
Ooh, do I have a rule of thumb? I am thinking, well, I try to ask myself as I'm revising, are the stakes getting higher? And then, of course, I follow commercial fiction, which is especially women's fiction romance. Is there a Black moment? So I'll be thinking about, what is the Black moment for this book? And am I properly building up to that Black moment? And then am I properly taking it down? And that second one is generally my bugaboo. Like, I'm going to have to, this, even at the second draft of the one that I just finished, I finally get right there to the Black moment, and then I'm just like racing to the end of the book, and I'm like, Sally, again, really, we're going to do this again? We need to put on the brakes, slow it down, make sure that we've built up to that moment. um Geez, I don't know that I have a rule of thumb these days. It's like, did it make my agent happy? Did it make my agent cry, actually?
That's actually a really good rule of thumb.
Then then we're where we're supposed to be.
We've got probably about 10 more minutes if we have more questions. So please do get those in there. In the meantime, I think of the title of your workshop, The Nice Girl's Guide to Conflict, and I do think of the nice girl or the nice guy, whatever it happens to be. And I mean, I know I in my life, much younger years, certainly did everything I could to avoid conflict. Certainly changed as I got older, but when writing a character that is that person that is not very good with conflict, or not very, trying to avoid it at all costs, um, how do you continue to push that character toward conflict without breaking them?
I think that for me, I have to come up with a structure. In this case, the barbecue contest. So I know that I'm going to take these characters through 3 competitions, and I already thought ahead to, if she's a proponent of whole hog, what's the most likely scenario? What could really damage her? And that would be the likelihood of a pit fire, because it's very dangerous. I mean, Grease Central, right?
Right.
So the question is, everything's leading to that point. I think what I have to constantly do is, how can I make this worse? How can I make this more uncomfortable for people? And that generally leads to a lot of rewriting, because even so, I'm I'm wanting to take those shortcuts too, just like the story that I was telling you earlier, where we're just really worried about visiting grandma, and then grandma shows up and I'm reading the book and I'm like, hold up, didn't we just spend 20 pages worrying about how we were going to get there? And then, okay, that's what you want to avoid. And I think for me, I see this a lot, and I do this a lot, is as you're reading, ask yourself, did I just diffuse the tension? Did I just make things easier for my characters when I could have made it harder for them? I'm trying to think of a good example of that. Um, oh, it could be as simple as, I had her car wouldn't start, and the only other person in the parking lot is this guy that they've been at odds since kindergarten. So then both of them have to make a decision. Is he going to help her out as he would help anybody else out? Or is he going to say, that's my mortal enemy, she's on her own? Is she going to accept his help? Or is she going to say, no, thank you, I'll just sit in the parking lot? In a previous draft, I might have had her call AAA, but what fun is that?
Right. No, that's good. Leslie has an example for us. She says, in my current novel, romance, obviously, the black moment is actually pretty early, and the story builds after that to a climax that is also a bit dark. Is 2 dark moments too much conflict?
I don't think so. People will say that it's angsty and it's great, as long as your characters are growing. So it could be very much, well, I'm listening to the Audible of Falguni Kathari's The Setup. And the idea is, they're Indian couple and their grandparents are playing matchmaker, and the first date is a disaster. So that's like a miniature black moment, because both of them, I mean, it's a disaster, but yet both of them leave it thinking, ooh, I wish I could have another date. So you can then start building up again. I'm thinking, there's a graph about Cinderella and about how it ratchets the tension, because it is dividing the power from the stepmother back to Cinderella. So it's like Cinderella gets an invitation to the ball. The stepmother says she can't go. The fairy godmother shows up so she can go to the ball, but the clock strikes 12. So she has to go home. The prince comes with the shoes. The stepmother won't let her try them on. So it's just like, are you adding to the stress of that character as you go through?
Well, got a few minutes left, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to allow you to, talk about yourself a little bit. So, Much Ado About Barbecue. Is that the right title? I get that right?
Yeah.
God, I
Yes.
feel like that's going to stick there. So, what is there a pub date for that? Or are you still working toward that?
That's September 2nd. It's
September
going to be
2nd.
out. It's
Okay.
up for pre-order on it's up for digital pre-order. It's not up for paper pre-order, because obviously we've not done editing it and we have to know exactly how many pages.
Excellent.
But it's up on, oh gosh, Amazon, Kobo, Google, Barnes and Noble, all those different places.
Cool.
Um,
Excellent. Last call for questions if anybody has any. I will.
Sadness, no Jolly Ranchers.
No.
No Jolly Ranchers if you don't have questions. If you did have questions, you can come see me at a later date and I will toss you some Jolly Ranchers like I would have my high school students.
Excellent. You were talking about the handouts, and that those are available if individuals want to email you. And the email address was
Sally
Sally
at
at,
sallykilpatrick.com.
okay.
And I will gladly share
Um,
with you my chart, and it's the other handout is basically a summation of what I've said. So
okay. All right. Well, yeah, I guess it looks like we don't have any more questions. So, thank you, Sally, for this. It's been great, and glad to have you in a program, and looking forward to having you at the conference.
thank
Um,
you very much.
Definitely for those of you who are interested in Sally's work, check out her website. Jessica's been pumping the link in there as often as she can. Be sure to follow her on social media. And if you're interested in ordering her books, any of the fine local independent bookstores that we have would be glad to help you. I know Foxtail definitely can do it. Eagle Eye Books. We have a bunch of others as well. So I want to be able to support indies as much as we possibly can, especially right now. So thank you, Sally, and thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Jessica Nettles, Vice Chairperson of the conference this year, for handling the chat tonight. And I hope to see you all on March 16th for our next Right Now.
All right. Thank you very much.
Have
Appreciate
a
it,
good night.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.